Caledonian elixir. Broadcasting from Glasgow, Scotland, I'm your host, Vincent Lawler. This is the Caledonian Elixir Show, and you can get involved by calling free from the UK on 0738 745 3353. That's 0738 745 3353. And the international number is also available on the screen. Or you can click the link on the description and come on that way. You can also leave some live chats and engage with us there too. So whether you agree or disagree, it's free. So click the link and tell us what you think. Now, today I have a guest on, Paul Owens, who's the author of The Baron of Rainbow Bridge. And he is on to discuss the paranormal, alien abductions. Now, this is the first part of several interviews I'll be having on the subject. I've had to break them up. So there are going to be more after this. So we know governments have been involved in managing public perception in respect to UFOs, or our more modern acronym UAPs. And it's not just the recent disclosure revealed by congressional committees. We could go back more than 70 years to Roswell, 1947, to when the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement that they recovered a crashed flying disc. You know, it's not me saying that, they said that. Then in the 1950s, we get the Robertson panel. And then after that, we get the Condon report. And then we get Project Blue Book. And as mentioned last year, we had the Congressional Committee on UAPs, and you had persons and government come forth saying there are crash retrieval programs ongoing today. So this is something that's part of the zeitgeist now. It's discussed by a lot of people, and not just in the media, but positions of power. So let's get this show on the road. So without further ado, Paul Owens. Hello, Paul.
Hello, hi Vincent. How are we?
I'm doing fine, but my cat was trying to get on screen here, so if I was a bit distracted at the end, try to push her away. That's why. So how are you today?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Just enduring the lovely Scottish weather that we've never seen in years. And if you don't live in this part of the world, there's one thing we always get in Scotland, it's the west of Scotland downpours. So it's a really it's a great treat to have temperatures like 27 degrees. You know, we don't often see it. So
it's a treat. You're a fan of this weather. You see, when it gets above 25, I'm
yeah.
a bit, you know.
Yeah.
I've evolved and adapted to the cooler temperatures. So once it gets to like 28, 29, like we've had over the weekend, I really struggle in that. In fact, I bought an air conditioner for like a domestic aircon for like £600 as soon as I heard we were going to reach 29 degrees. But you know, so to get to it, in your opinion, to get to the alien abduction phenomenon, UAPs, etc. In your opinion, what's the most interesting element of the alien abduction experience?
Well, I think the fact that these abductions are happening to real people, they're not just some kind of mythological story dreamt up by skeptics who can't accept that these unexplainable accounts are in fact genuine stories by genuine people. So when we talk about alien abductions and people being abducted by some other life force or some other entities, we really are looking at a situation of the world that we know is somehow coming into contact with another world, the one that we don't know. And how these two things can work together is absolutely amazing. A long time ago, it was more really just sightings of lights and skies, and people would say, "Oh, that's the planet Venus. It's a star." Yes, of course, you can explain some of it by those explanations. But when we have an individual or people or groups of people telling us that, in fact, they have experienced, they've seen aliens or they've been on board a spacecraft, like the Barney and Betty Hill story in America, what are we to say to that? It
Mm.
just seems so fantastic. But in reality, it's something that is a genuine story and we need to take it seriously.
Well, Paul, I want you to put on a short clip from a film called Fire in the Sky. I don't know if you've heard of the Travis Walton abduction. It's one of the most interesting and famous cases we have, alongside Betty and Barney Hill. Oh, of course, this is a dramatized version, and it wasn't as horrifying as this film depicts. But I just want to show a clip of
Yep.
this.
Hmm.
Right, well, that wasn't a pleasant experience by
Yeah.
the looks of it.
Uh,
Um, so, yeah, you were saying.
well, yeah, I mean, when you hear Travis Walton's story, this is a case of a genuine individual who was just out doing a day's work, working in the forests as a logger, whatever, with his colleagues,
Mhm.
and just traveling home after a day's work in the forest, chopping down trees. And as they drive along, they see this light by the roadside, and they go along, and suddenly this craft is there, and so he gets out the truck, the pickup. Other people, they're there, his friends, they see it, and they're terrified, and he gets back in the truck, they get back in the truck, and he's left there, and obviously he's taken on board the ship. The light comes down, the beam comes down, something happens, and suddenly he's not on the ground anymore, he's somewhere else. And of course, the mystery was that he disappeared for a considerable period of time. His friends were interviewed by the state
Mhm.
police and accused him of murder or something, when in fact they told the truth. They had seen a ship, and something did happen, and and when he came back, he was discovered, as you know. Suddenly he tells this story, and nobody wants to hear it, nobody wants to believe it. So if it
Mhm.
happens to you or me or
Of
someone
course,
else, you know
there is more to the story than is depicted in the film, because Travis Walton said that during his abductions he encountered human beings, but he was taken to a site, a base that what appeared to him as a base, and there were military personnel. So you have a case, an example of my labs there, where you have the military working alongside um, extraterrestrials allegedly. So his
Mhm,
actual the background to that's
mhm,
a lot more interesting
mhm.
than the film. depicts. But he also um, has been quite critical of our film because, as you saw there, the beings that were performing an operation on him, they weren't the willowy types, the grey types that we are familiar with the large almond dark eyes. They are more sinister looking in that film.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, it's either way. I think whether you're being abducted by the willowy grey types with almond dark eyes, inky dark eyes, or those types that would still be frightening. Do you think the abductions is any type of abduction that you're familiar with that has terrified you, or you thought, oh, like
Well, I think in having looked at quite a number of these cases over the years, I think anyone that experiences or encounters an alien being in itself would be a terrifying experience. Um,
mm,
and there are so many different accounts of these things happening, people encountering these things. Um, whether it's experiments that are carried out on potential kind of victims or whatever way you want to see it, horrific stories of instruments being put into their navels, their sexual genitalia played around with the instruments, things inserted into their mouths, into their eyes. It would not be a pleasant experience. It would be terrifying if it was a human that did it to you. But if it's some other creature from another galaxy, life form, it would be absolutely frightening beyond belief.
one of the reasons I was asking that is because there appears to me at least a departure in the UFO paranormal community from perceiving abductions as a malign experience, with the abductee considered the victim, to now calling abductees experiencers. There appears to be a cultural shift to actually embracing the event as a spiritual event, almost.
It can be seen as a spiritual event, and I suppose um, if it happens to you, it's a real physical event, and it may well be a spiritual event at the same time. But I would have to say that those people who see it in terms of some kind of religious experience, you have to ask yourself, as you said a minute ago, is it a malevolent experience or is it a benevolent experience? What kind of experience is it? And if it is a malevolent one, it's malicious, it's terrifying, then people have a right to question why this is happening to them, and they have a right to be fearful of those kind of events. But not all abduction stories are terrifying. There's been many cases where people who were abducted claimed it was a wonderful experience, a very euphoric type of experience, one of intense joy, where the creatures were friendly, respectful, and didn't do them any harm.
The one alien abduction case that terrified me as a child is. Are you familiar with the book Communion,
Yes, I have it in my
written by
shelf
Whitley
somewhere.
Striber?
Yeah, I've got the book.
Great. That's an excellent book.
Hmm.
And that terrified me as a kid. In fact, Christopher Walken's acting in the film adaptation, terrified me alone.
Yep,
But I mean, there's something to be said about Christopher Walken that in every film he plays Christopher Walken.
yep, yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it's Deer Hunt or Communion,
Hmm.
but he plays Christopher Walken. But that film did terrify me. The book
Hmm.
terrified me when I went on to read it,
Hmm.
and when I was a teenager. And for the audience, what Whitley Striber said happened to him is up in upstate New York, in rural New York. Him and his family were staying at a log cabin, essentially, and well, were asleep when a light appeared that enveloped the cabin,
Hmm.
and Whitley awoke to find what he called visitors,
Uh-huh.
beings that did not appear to be human. And all of a sudden, they were in his bedroom, and they took him out of the cabin.
mhm,
he felt paralyzed, and they took him to a strange,
mhm,
smelly, circular room.
mhm.
And he said he couldn't focus on him because he was so overcome with fear every time he looked at them. And that causes his terror to just, go into a paroxysm of fear. And he described him again as that small, willowy type with dark, inky eyes, and the other ones with um, coveralls. And as you know, like as time passed, his memories of the event started to return, but he was very confused. So he went to Bud Hopkins, who suggested that Whitley be hypnotized, and under
Yep,
hypnosis, his memories recovered. That going back to his childhood, he had encountered these beings many
yep,
times,
yep.
and that was one case that sticks out to me because going back to what you said, Whitley has alluded to it being a horrific experience, but also a spiritual experience that he's embraced and has changed his life fundamentally and changed how he looks at the world, and that his um, relationship with the visitors has evolved
Hmm.
as he's gotten older.
Yeah. Well, that's right.
So,
Mhm,
in terms of the Whitley Striber case
mhm.
abduction, because I think it's one of the most seminal, well-known ones. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I have no doubts that Whitley Strieber's case is genuine. Having read the book a number of years ago, um, it's a more than interesting story. And for any of your viewers who haven't seen the read the book or seen any films, they should have a look at Whitley Strieber's Communion book. The film is great. You know the stuff that he talks about on the documentaries. A very interesting man, and I think that. Again, what is really fascinating is when an individual is just living a normal family life. He's in a log cabin. He's on holiday or he's on vacation or whatever. He's just living a normal life. And as you say, a light appears outside this cabin, and these creatures appear inside the cabin. And when you read that, you're thinking to yourself, what if it happened to me? How would I perceive this? How would I behave? And it's hard to really get your head round it, but certainly I think that what happened to Whitley was more than an interesting kind of experience. It
Well,
opened a lot of
he did
people's.
do that. He questioned his own sanity, and I think
Yeah.
he was
Hmm.
tested for temporal lobe epilepsy, because apparently
Yes.
that condition can cause strong, vivid hallucinations.
Hmm.
And he underwent lie detector
Hmm.
tests. So there's a lot to corroborate, at
Hmm.
least that he believed what occurred was real.
Hmm.
To say
Well,
that,
yeah. I mean, just to give you some kind of examples, the there's many experiences that people have had with the kind of close encounter scenario. A well-known one happened in 1994 at the Ariel School in Rua in Zimbabwe, and this was a very interesting experience because it happened with school children in a playground. Now, these children had gone out into the playground. It was really just a big field out in the country, and they wandered into an area they shouldn't have been in at the school, and they saw something that was really extraordinary. And they came back and told the older children something's happening here. The older children went to bring them back in, and what they saw in the field was a large UFO hovering above the ground and some smaller craft. Then there was two alien beings appeared to the children. Some had slanty eyes, some had a sort of lined, thin kind of mouth. They observed a silver object that shone, and at first they thought it was a house made of glass, which was reflecting in the sun. But they knew it wasn't because there were no houses in that field. It didn't exist. But they knew
mhm.
that what they were seeing was something more very odd. And as they watched this craft, they heard a strange noise that sounded like a flute coming from this craft. And then the next thing, they saw a black figure that seemed to be running in a kind of slow motion along the front of the craft in the grass. And as the figure looked at them, they were obviously terrified. At least 60 children witnessed this craft. when they went back to the school and told the teachers who were in a meeting what they had seen, they thought it was all a kind of fantasy story made up just to amuse people. But in fact, it wasn't. It was a real story. Now, this
Mhm.
story, what is interesting is that um, a Harvard psychiatrist called Professor John Mack, he went out to Zimbabwe and
Yeah, I'm
interviewed these
aware of that.
children. You're aware of him. So,
Mhm.
having done all of this, what is, just to show you, Professor Mack, after this, investigated all this, and he was ridiculed by his fellow colleagues at Harvard because he was looking into this UFO kind of experience. Professor Mack said it was the most interesting thing he had heard in 40 years as a psychiatrist. And he was ridiculed. He was almost sneered at by his fellow academic colleagues. He underwent evaluations to prove he wasn't losing his mind. He wasn't suffering a mental delusion or illnesses. This man was a top man, and
Mhm.
a very, very interesting man. But it just shows you how um, these real experiences, like the children at the Zimbabwe school, who I believe told the truth, because children are always innocent and they just say
Mhm.
things the way they see it. There's not any
And
confabulation.
there was a significant number of them as well. It wasn't like it was just a couple of kids that witnessed
Yeah,
this.
there was 60 or 61 children experienced the Ariel School encounter, and they actually all drew pictures of it afterwards. The head teacher got them to do all of this, and the head teacher actually said himself after this, the parents and the school didn't believe them at first. He thought the kids definitely had seen something not of this world, is what he said. But the teachers were kind of shocked. They were geared not to believe this story. They thought it was all just a fairy story, a fantasy that young children had. So, 60 children, a top Harvard professor, he also believed their story. And as a teacher myself of, let's just say, a quarter of a century, I
Mhm.
also believe the children, what they said. Why shouldn't you believe them? You know?
Yeah. It sounds like we definitely witnessed something. 60 kids. It's not like you're going to get 60 kids to all get
No.
together during lunchtime and decide to all concoct a story together that,
Yeah.
like, um, I know we've moved on from this, but I have a short clip of Whitley Striber discussing
Yep.
certain unusual phenomena related to extraterrestrials. So I just want to play this.
You know, the cattle mutilations are so mysterious, but they're actually not mysterious because the blood of cattle is full of copper.
Yeah.
And they're using that as food.
Yeah, the
They're
bovine.
using the same food source we use, and we're upset about it, and they probably don't even realize that. I think they've used humans as a food source from time to time too, but I don't think they do that. I think they figured out that, either the ones that were doing that shouldn't have been doing it, or they didn't understand what we were. I think they want companions, as I say, but they'll take slaves if they don't get companions. I know them too well.
What does that mean? They'll take
That means
slaves?
soul slaves. That means they'll take over your soul. If you're relentlessly denying the existence of your own soul and pretending this is all technology and science as we understand it and so forth and all of that, they're eventually going to just say, well, hell, this soul is valuable to us and we're taking it. We're taking it over.
So, soul slavery, that's an
Yeah.
interesting concept in regards to it.
Yep. Well, that's another angle that perhaps not too many people have discussed, that their souls are being taken over. It's almost like a type of possession of some sort, where aliens can take over and possess people. But there have been lots of very strange sort of cases. One particular book called Alien Spirits by Ron Halliday, who I spoke to recently. Ron's book was a story about a man who, in a sense, in an Edinburgh house, was being taken over by alien spirits. So that's an interesting one. Perhaps you don't even have to be there for alien spirits to take over an individual. Who knows?
Mm. What role do you think psychological or neurological factors play in this? You know, you've got sleep paralysis, and I mentioned it earlier, temporal lobe epilepsy.
Mhm.
What role do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that these conditions do exist from a medical point of view. No one would question that, but it's whether or not what you're actually experiencing, or these people are experiencing, is something that is of the mind. And as I mentioned a minute ago when I was talking about Professor John Mack, John Mack was interested in clinical psychology, and he said that people were often looking for scientific proof to try and prove these things. But he said maybe that's not the best way. He interviewed these people and he asked, are they suffering a trauma? Are they suffering from psychosis when they've said they've seen these alien ships? And he felt that it is what it is. People, these cases, the case in Zimbabwe, actually did happen. The children did experience the creatures. They did see the ship. All of the things that they said did in fact happen. So to say that it's some kind of experience that's coming out of a psychological condition, there may be cases people hallucinate, they can see things, but in the majority of cases, you can't tell me that someone who just happens to be walking out in a field, or 60 kids, suddenly they're all hallucinating and seeing things. It just doesn't add up.
Paul, can you just give me 10 seconds? I need to, I just got an alert on my laptop. Basically the battery's a bit low, so I just need to plug it in. So just give me 10 seconds, please.
Right.
Right, thank you.
Right.
So what do you think of the actually before I move on, you alluded to how you don't think it's an exclusive psychological issue because you know when you have so many children that are present or people in general who witness these events, it's hard
Mhm.
to say they're all suffering from mass hysteria
Yeah.
or a mass delusion. However, it can be both, couldn't it? If there could be some element of a screen memory. There are
Mhm.
people who claim that during an abduction experience or when they witness this strange phenomenon that they do experience hallucinations or they can't quite accurately recall what took place. So by virtue of the fact that they can't accurately recall what took place and they undergo hypnosis, therefore there must be a psychological dimension um, that is working on their experience.
Yeah, there always is a psychological dimension, a spiritual dimension to these things, as there is with human events. But when we talk about physical evidence, we're talking about scorch marks in the grass, indentations in the grass. For example, if you look at the Bob Taylor incident that happened in Scotland, I think it was 1979. Bob, a forestry worker, walking with his dog every day. He was in the forest, that was his job. And down in West Lothian. And suddenly he sees a ship in a field, a spaceship, and the spiky balls rolled out of the portholes of this ship, attached it to either side of his trousers, and began to pull up. And Bob Taylor collapsed onto the ground. He didn't know what was happening to him. This was happening. And then, after this experience, he wasn't able to drive his truck home or get home. He went home. His wife thought he had been in a car accident. He was in a terribly disheveled state. The doctor was called, who examined him, and clearly something from a physical point of view had happened to this guy. And furthermore, the Lothian and Borders police were called out, I believe eventually. They went to the scene where in the forest he saw this. They examined the ground, and there was markings on the ground. Now, that constitutes physical evidence. And not only that, but you will find that in the field that this UFO landed, there was a gate, it was padlocked, there was no way in and there was no way out. So the council were called. Deckment Law was where this happened. It's near Falkirk. And the council were asked, did you have any vehicles in the forest that day? They said, no, we had no trailers, no vehicles, nothing. And the gate was locked and padlocked. There was no way a vehicle could get in there. The police themselves, having examined the grass, the field, said it just looked as if something had come down from above. Right? So physical evidence. Then if you look at the spiritual side or the psychological side in this case, Bob Taylor was accused of having hallucinations. He was accused of having eaten some berries in a forest, berry tropicana or something it was called, which could have caused this. Which the answer to that is, of course, Bob didn't eat berries in a forest. He never had any medical case of having hallucinations or suffering from any medical conditions that could have caused this. He wasn't epileptic or anything that might have caused this. So the physical evidence was there. It's a very real experience. And to the day that Bob died in his 80s, he never changed his story.
Yeah, I mean, the UK government's Condon report also outlines evidence of individuals, I think it was radiation burns and electromagnetism, and so they reported physical evidences of something affecting witnesses. So it's definitely a physical phenomenon. It's not just psychological or spiritual. And the persons that have came forth in the congressional committees who have claimed that they are crash retrieval programs and that they do have physical technologies as a result of these retrieval programs is more evidence that there's something physical to this.
Yeah, I mean, the physical dimension is real, because if it was just solely a psychological experience in the mind, or if it was actually just some spiritual thing, some kind of hallucinatory experience, then there would be no physical evidence whatsoever external to this. For example, if you look at the famous Australian UFO case in Westall, which happened in the 6th of April 1966 in Melbourne in Victoria. Again, it was another school UFO sighting where many of the children experienced these flying saucers, as they called them at the time. And they said that they had seen a ship that was kind of round with a dome top, white, grey and silver in colour. And according to the students, the kind of object came down behind a row of trees into an area called the Grange. And so it was an open area kind of south of the school area. And so these children saw the actual saucer hovering. It was also seen hovering over a road, and some of the children climbed over a fence onto the road and stood a couple of maybe meters away from the ship as these flying saucers were hovering. They said they were very hot. They could feel the heat. Again, it's not psychological. They could actually feel the heat from the objects. And the other thing about it is that after these craft had been seen, there was actually, the students had said that they had seen a circle of grass that was burnt or boiled or somehow been pressed down in the field where the UFO had landed. So again, the evidence was there. And then, strangely, as the story usually goes, strange men come, well dressed in military attire. No one knows who they are. And they remove all the burnt grass, they remove all these things, they remove all the evidence, and the children are summoned into the school and told, you will not speak about this. taken into a headmaster's office and told, you didn't see any of this. It simply didn't happen. When the children knew it had happened and they were reliable witnesses. So even one of the teachers in this Westall UFO incident, apparently one of the teachers had a camera and photographed the flying saucers, and his camera was confiscated, taken away, and it was never seen again. So it begs the question, but the evidence is there.
Yes, and I mean, I think the first recorded case I recall, well, the earliest recorded case was in 16th or 15th century Japan, where it was I think a Japanese general who documented, along with many in his company, of anomalous aerial objects. Now, when you're talking about the 15th, 16th century, you're not talking about aircraft, are you?
No.
And he recorded seeing these anomalous aerial objects being in the sky for several hours, undertaking maneuvers. And he didn't use those terms, maneuvers. I'm paraphrasing, but this goes back a long way. But what do you think of the parallels between modern ufology or UFO lore and historical accounts of paranormal activity, such as the Celtic folklore? And again, you've got the abductions and the strange lights depicted in fairy lore, and then you've got the biblical accounts of Ezekiel's chariot, or the flying Vimanas. I think they're called Vimanas, depicted in the Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedantic literature. So do you think what do you think of the overlaps or parallels there? Do you think there are any parallels, or is this just similarities?
Well, when you look at religious texts, for example, the Bhagavad Gita, and you talk about the Viyamanas, these flying objects, flying chariots, I think is how they're described. Then you're asking the question, what is going on? The same in the biblical account, Ezekiel's chariot, which is described, and many people, including von Daniken, thought it was some kind of craft like a UFO. Then again, we're looking at the question of what lies behind the text. Are these eyewitness accounts of something that people are actually seeing, a physical experience? Or is there something behind the text that is, what are the sources behind these events? Now, when you look at, you mentioned a medieval kind of UFO experience there. That was quite interesting to hear about that. But there are many medieval oil paintings of famous, kind of religious paintings with UFOs in them. There's like pictures of Madonnas, and over the shoulder there's a spaceship in the sky. And this is, we're talking about medieval paintings. So you're right enough. Even back then, people knew about these things, and even further back, Alexander the Great. I think there was an account when he said he was crossing the Rubicon. There was strange objects in the sky. It was noted in his accounts, and that's long before the medieval period, right? We're going way back in time, right? So these accounts have been going on for years, these kind of similarities. Regarding whether they are just something that's, as I say, the creation of some kind of textual worker who has written a text and made up a story, or whether they're literal observations, that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. What lies behind a text? For example, if you had a UFO encounter yourself, like Whitley Striber, and you wrote it all down, we either believe it or we don't. It's as simple as that. And it's a matter of conscience. It's a matter of prayerful meditation, perhaps, to decide, yeah, I think that guy's telling the truth.
Yeah. I think we've got some anomalous activity behind.
Okay.
See, when you've got these accounts,
yeah,
from all parts of the world throughout history, traditions dealing with visitation and abductions,
yeah,
sometimes in religious literature, sometimes in mythology. And another example of a bit of both for mythology and religious literature is Fatima,
Yeah,
where
of course.
eyewitnesses
Hmm.
witnessed the sun dance in the sky.
Yes.
Strange. Now, the sun isn't going to be dancing or moving about in the sky like that, because if that was the case,
Hmm.
we would all be dead.
Hmm.
So therefore, considering the huge, vast number of witnesses that were you know, present there, they probably witnessed something else in the sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, that's another example. But you've written a book called the Baron of Rainbow Bridge,
Mhm.
and this book, among many other things, is a study of an anomalous site with that has paranormal effects.
Yeah.
So, do you think there is an overlap between strange, anomalous locations and the paranormal in general? I mean, for example, Skinwalker Ranch or the Bermuda Triangle,
Mhm.
and the Palace of Versailles. So,
Yes.
what do you think?
Yeah, I think there are many sites around the world. Now, you mentioned Fatima there, and sure, there's many sites within the Catholic faith where miracles have happened, and people have observed these apparitions. And so, when I hear Richard Dawkins trying to debunk Catholic miracles, I would have to say to Richard Dawkins, well, one, you weren't there and you didn't actually see what the people saw or experienced, right? So, as a kind of objective observer that wasn't there, sure, you're entitled to your opinion, but sometimes we have to listen to the people that have had these experiences, whether it be Fatima or whether it be Medjugorje or any of these places. The people have had these experiences, and it's not beyond God's possibility to perform these miracles or signs of wonders that can happen in our world. The
I
supernatural,
think he's came out now as a cultural Christian. I think that's what he's identified now as. He
right?
doesn't believe in God, but culturally he identifies as a
Right.
Christian.
Well, I don't know his position, but what can say is that when someone says that they've had an experience, an apparition has appeared, a ghost, or any kind of thing like that, it's entirely down to the person's own experience. If they've had an experience, they say that the Virgin Mary has appeared to them, as some people have seen in Ireland and elsewhere, or someone tells you they've seen a ghost, I cannot say to them, no, you didn't, because that's their personal experience and it's true to them, and it may well be true. Um, sure, we can always look critically and say, well, there's this, there's that, there's something else. But when people are genuinely truthful, why would they make up these stories? They've nothing to hide. There's nothing to be, falsified. It's a genuine experience, you
Well,
know?
but that's interesting what you said there. It's true to
Yeah.
them, because you've a background in religious studies, and I recently read the Astavakra Gita, right, an Indian Vedantic treatise, and when I read Eastern philosophy or religion, there's a sort of there's a consciousness or a biocentrism there, a sort of biocentric view of reality, and I had this thought when I was reading Vastavakra Gita that maybe the paranormal phenomena is a manifestation of our own psyche, our own mind, sort of like Jung, how he would describe archetypal forces. Um, so when you alluded to how it's real for them, could this be tied in to how a more um, consciousness based experience and centric form of reality, as opposed to a more observable, um, existential phenomenon?
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
understand my question, that was a bit
Yeah.
tangled, but
Yeah. Well, that's very true. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke talked in his Strange World programs. One of the points he made was that when people see visions or apparitions or ghosts or whatever, perhaps it's like that the eye is like an inverted camera that projects something back into the mind. It's not actually out there. It's something that's inside of you in your mind. And so you're just seeing what the eye is reflecting back inwardly into your mind. So that can be, so you could say that all of these experiences then are somehow, from a conscious point of view, they're created out of that. But again, you know, how can we explain the cases of near-death experiences where a man born blind from birth dies and then sees everything that's going on in an operating theatre, right? He can't see, he's not using his senses, right? He's not even conscious, he's dead. But he said he saw it all. And then he comes back into his body and he tells everybody, he said, it's impossible. How could you know that this nurse took this, stethoscope out of these drawers? She was wearing a blue dress with a silver bangle on. He describes everything. So there's just no way that it can be totally related to consciousness. But again, physical evidence would tell you that there are things going on that are happening in our external world.
Well, there is some excellent work that can be done with hypnotism. You know, you had George Estabrooks, the famous, infamous World War II scientist, who was used by the US Army in order to create Japanese Manchurian candidates. And through using hypnotism, he could create dissonant identity disorder, multiple personalities, and use these captured prisoners of war as spies or saboteurs, etc.
Yeah.
And it's that ability to compartmentalize a part of your mind and not even be aware of what you're doing or what you have done that shows the power of the mind and its ability to manifest or create reality. So what I'm alluding to is I personally do think that there is a strong argument to say that the psyche has a pivotal role in the evolution of this phenomena. If you look at the alien abduction experience or the idea of visitations, it has changed from Kenneth Arnold's depiction in the 1940s of a flying disc to the more prevalent depiction today of anomalous orbs. You have Richard Greer, who is well known in the disclosure community, who takes people on tours to witness these orbs that they can induce through forms of meditation. And so I can remember as a child watching the old Twilight Zone and again seeing the the depiction of the disc, a flying saucer.
Right.
So I do see there is that cultural evolution. And then you fast forward again to the 90s with the X-Files and the depiction of, the Grey, or Heaven's Gate, the cult that committed suicide, believing that they would evolve into the next evolutionary level when the comet approached Earth, and they too would transform into Greys. There is almost I see there is a development, an evolution alongside our culture. As our culture changes, so does our perception of this paranormal phenomenon.
Yeah, but there are things, known as mind-independent realities, which exist outside of the mind. You can't base everything on a psychiatric or psychological premise. Although you can, there's many things can be invented by the mind. I'm very sure of it. But for example, if you look at something called mind-body dualism, the question about this kind of relationship is, how does the mind interact with the body, which is something physical? Now, that's a very complex kind of question to answer. How do you solve the mind-body problem? How does the conscious world interact with the physical world? And that's what people are trying to discover all the time. How does the soul connect with a physical body? How does it work? How does an immaterial consciousness connect with something that's physical in the physical world and interact with it? That's why we're humans, and I can say hello and wave my hands because I'm intending to do it out of my mind, but I'm physically interacting. So there's clearly an interaction. That's it. But I wouldn't base all these experiences on a mind-only thing. I think the evidence says there's so many things that have been seen that are not in the mind at all. And why would people have these mind experiences? There has to be a cause for every effect. So what is the cause if there's a mass sighting of something and people see this? There has to be a cause. What would that cause be?
Well, but I can recall the story written by Jung, and it was about the scarab beetle, how one of his patients had a dream about long life and
Mhm.
long life and Egyptian theology. And as the patient was describing the dream to Jung, a beetle flew on the window, and it was like a scarab beetle. And as you know, the scarab beetle is a symbol for long life in
Right.
Egyptian theology, and that goes back to what Jung was trying to argue, that the causality, cause and effect, there could be something else at work. Like synchronicity is a relationship between two objects or two things, but there doesn't necessarily have to be a cause there connecting them.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I think the law of cause and effect is well established, certainly within science. Science relies on cause and effect. And if you have it, I'm not saying that it's entirely that, but I think that you're probably right. There is some other element to it, because how can effects precede their cause? For this case of some kind of, I don't know, pre-recognition or some kind of experience where you have a premonition, and you know something's going to happen, and it does happen. Now, how can you possibly know before the effect? Because that's putting the effect before the cause. So there's clearly something in what you say. There possibly could be some other dimension to it.
Well, it sounds like you're alluding to a form of entanglement there, a connection that isn't perhaps observable. And psi phenomena is an excellent example of that. You have had Operation Stargate. I think it's John McGonigal and a lot of Ingo Swann, a lot of well-known remote viewers, and it's well documented
Yep,
that from a distance they had a high success rate
that's
and
right.
remote viewing, etc. And it also ties in, I think, to apparitions or other events like maybe ghosts. But do you think apparitions or witnessing ghosts or anything like that, fairies, is the same thing as the alien abduction experience, or is this something completely different? Do you think there's any kind of relationship there?
I think that the alien abduction experience is genuinely real. I think it happens in the physical world. It's a physical ship, physical beings, and physical people. I don't think it's something that's some kind of psychological phenomenon that's going on, that somehow it's in their mind, and really they're just sitting in a chair when all this is happening and there's no spaceship. I don't agree with that. I think that that can happen under certain conditions, medical ones. But I think, for ordinary people like you or I, Vincent, if we're walking down a street and we turn a corner and things aren't the way they're meant to be, and we see something, we might touch it, we might feel it, we might, it's as simple as that. It is what it is. You have these experiences. If we reduce everything to a mind-only capacity, you end up with a solipsistic view of the universe, a solipsistic kind of God, or a solipsistic mind, which is very limited,
For
right?
the audience, could you describe solipsism?
Well, something that exists in the mind only, right? It's some kind of, it's there's nothing outside of that. I wouldn't agree with that. I think there is an external world out there, and the fact that science relies on cause and effect, it relies on Newtonian science, the laws of observation and experiment, where we do experiments and we get data, reliable data from scientific experiments. We have to trust that, and we go with that, and it works. And that's why science has advanced. We can't just assume it's all something in the mind. It's there's
No,
things.
I do think this is something that is real, that is physical.
Right.
The reason I was focusing on that so much is because I've noticed that there is such a cultural shift from the 80s and 90s, where it was considered much more of a negative experience. I can remember watching interviews with Bud Hopkins and there was other writers on the subject, like Timothy Cook, and you've got Whitley Striber, but etc. And back then, it was depicted as much more of a negative experience. Women would, report, being, for want of a better word, raped and experimented on sexually and stuff. In fact, Whitley Striber claimed that himself. And there, as I said, there has been that change. That it's now being embraced culturally, and they call themselves experiencers. So there's just a psychological shift, and that's why I'm bringing that up. Why psychologically have they changed in how they view the experience in general? Even when you go back to shows like the X-Files back in the early 90s, or even even in the 70s, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there was something sinister about it, about the abduction experience. And I don't see much of that anymore.
Well, you're talking about Close Encounters. I'm just going to show you something here. I don't know if your viewers can see this, but here is, this is actually, this is a Close Encounters kind of signed booklet. It's actually mine. It's signed by everyone that was in the film. So this here goes back in time. This is actually when the film was released in 1977, and it's signed by Richard Dreyfuss there, and everybody. Steven Spielberg signed there. It's signed by all the actors. Now, this particular film, what people don't realise about this film is that, well, it was based on real accounts. Steven Spielberg was in fact a great believer at that time in the UFO phenomenon. And so Close Encounters is based on real experiences where people engage with the aliens. In the case of Richard Dreyfuss, he plays the part of Roy Neary as a character who gets abducted in this film. But it's a very interesting film. But in that film, you don't see any bad things happening. It's just he's taken aboard the ship. That's kind of it. But it has progressed now to something entirely different. And another interesting point about this film is that Dr. Alan Hynek, who invented the phrase "Close Encounters of the Third Kind," he appears in this film. So, folks, if you watch this film, you happen to see it, you'll see Dr. Alan Hynek, the real UFO investigator who came out with a lot of these things.
It is a phenomenal film. It is a great film. Just one last question before we wrap this up. Do you think we'll ever get to actual disclosure? Because when we have congressional committees, like as we've had of recent, and they acknowledge that they are biologics, that we are to imagine are extraterrestrial entities, that's the term they use, biologics, and that they've acknowledged that they are crash retrieval programs, and there is nothing. There is no hysteria about it. In fact, I don't. No one talks about it, but I know they don't really seem to care much. So, how far does it go till we get actual disclosure? And what is actual disclosure? Because when we're getting congressional committees acknowledging this and nothing changes, what is actual disclosure?
Well, this is what they call the unwrapping of the sweetie, and it's slowly being unwrapped, right? Just a bit at a time. The candy bar has been unwrapped just very slowly, very subtly, bit by bit, and you see a little bit of the sweetie and then another bit until eventually it will be displayed in front of us. And so the unwrapping of the sweetie is, in a sense, a very kind of subtle process, as you've rightly said. When we look at things further back in time, there's a different picture, and now there's another picture of UFOs and alien abductions, and now it's moving into something else. But I think it's happening because they've always been coming here, but I think we're seeing a bit more of the sweetie each time now. It's been gradually revealed to us. It's a process, and perhaps some of these latest cockpit videos of UFOs taken by the American military, they're now actually showing you we actually have got these things on video, and you see an object, the Tic Tac video, so called, where the object falls from about 70,000 feet down to 50 feet in 7.2 seconds. It's impossible, but that's exactly what this object does. An object that has no obvious heat signature, no obvious means of propulsion, no windows, and it can just move like that. So fast, people can't even imagine. So we're now moving towards these images being normalized. Look, here it is, folks.
It's a process of desensitization.
Yes, yes, yes. For what the purpose is, maybe they want to reveal it. I don't know the real reasons why. But remember Margaret Thatcher many years ago when she was asked as a Prime Minister about were UFOs real? And her line was always very interesting. But you can't tell the people.
So you believe that it's disclosure and it's the government disclosing it slowly, gradually, or the military, or who is disclosing it to the public?
Well, the way that we know nowadays about any news item is through the media. In the modern media these days, it's not like newspapers, which were exclusively used, not far back in time, but now we have all these media outlets on televisions, tablets, mobile phones, and so these are the outlets that we're finding out about these pieces of information. The information is controlled by the powers that be, and they are slowly showing us little indicators that things are moving in a certain direction. What the purpose is, I don't know. Way back in time, people said, oh, they'll never release it because it would frighten the world. I get that side of it, but the public have a right to know if aliens have landed here, and I believe that they have, and many, many cases of it, not just one ship. We're not just talking about Roswell. We're talking about many, many craft have been retrieved in Britain, the UK, America, South America, you name it. It's happened. Russia. These countries have all experienced it. Where these craft are, who's got them, we don't actually know. Are they been hidden by the military? Are they being controlled by the governments? Or, in fact, are the aliens controlling the military? Are they controlling the governments? We just don't know.
That's one thing that I've been wondering. Is the reason, could it be that the reason there isn't disclosure, that they don't outright acknowledge the existence of these visitors, of these entities, wherever they come from, whatever they are, is that because they're not in control, and the government doesn't want to admit that they can't control this, because that's potentially more frightening than the idea that there are extraterrestrials. The fact that the government is like a child in comparison, and they can't do anything to stop it. And to admit that to your public, the electorate that puts you in power, why would we put our faith, if you do have any faith in these people already, why would we want to put our faith any more in them if they would put their hands up and go, no, not only have we been concealing this, we're powerless.
Yeah. It would be obvious to anyone that any kind of alien entities that have the capabilities, the scientific advanced technologies to somehow visit this planet, wherever they come from, their science is way, way light years ahead of us. and absolutely there's nothing we can do about them. I think the militaries now and the governments are now beginning, as I say, to slowly unwrap the picture that yes, we do admit we have seen these things, and they're beginning to sort of be a bit more open, a wee bit more open about it, with the recent, disclosure of videos from aircraft, from naval ships, pictures of videos of objects hovering, 100 meters from a naval ship. Suddenly it just dips below the ocean and stuff like this. We've got the videos. The military acknowledge that they're there, but what they are, we don't know. Why they're here, we don't know. And maybe we're the powerless ones, as you say.
Okay, I know I said that was the, the final question, but we had a conversation about the Palace of Versailles incident, and you don't have to go into it. I was just wondering, do you want to mention it at all, or describe what that's about?
Well, the Palace of Versailles mystery is based on what's known as the Moberly Jourdain time slip. And a time slip, for those of you who maybe haven't heard of it, it just means that people who are in this time frame in 2025, they could, for example, walk down the street, down to their local shop, and suddenly turn a corner and they see things in another time, or perhaps they are physically in another time. And that's what happened in Versailles to two women, Eleanor Jourdain and Charlotte Ann Moberly, who were academics at St Hugh's College in Oxford. They went over to Paris, where they were staying there, and they decided to visit the gardens and palaces of Versailles, which, as many people will know, were frequented by Queen Marie Antoinette, King Louis XVI. It was their kind of buildings. And so when these two women visited these gardens back in 1901, they began to see very, very strange experiences. They saw many peoples and figures that were dressed out of character, that were dressed out of time. They didn't appear to have come from the time that they lived in. And many of the locations and things that they saw there that they witnessed on that day were totally unusual. And when they went back at a later date, they couldn't find any of the buildings or the bridge or any of the things they had seen. It just simply didn't exist.
Yeah, as an interesting case, especially when you get into the weeds. It did captivate me, and I wanted to learn a lot more about it. Okay, so thank you for coming on again. You were in a previous episode of Overton Bridge one, and that too was an enjoyable one.
Yeah.
If there's anything you would like to promote or tell the public before we wrap it up.
Yep. Okay. Well, one thing I can tell people about is I don't know if they can see this. This is it's not a particularly great picture. This is the the Supernatural Secrets Symposium. It's in 2026. There's a lot of great paranormal speakers attending there. I myself will be giving a talk on the Overton Bridge, and it's being held on Saturday, the 6th of June at 10 p.m. to 7. That's Saturday, the 6th of June, and that's next year. So put that in your diary. The Supernatural Secrets Symposium. It's being held at the University of Glasgow, Queen Margaret Union, and lots of very interesting speakers talking about all kinds of topics. And as I say, I myself will be giving a talk on Overton Bridge, and hopefully some of you might make it along.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Vincent. Appreciated.
Goodbye.
God bless you. Take care. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Gold pressed platinum, slip strips and bars. If you ever find some, you can lose it in quartz. Get a Ractogino, spin the double wheel. Order a black hole, just depends how you feel. Yeah, it just depends how you feel. Gold pressed platinum, you gas. Morn vomits it up into a tiny little glass. Liquid platinum, more you amass. Better than bronze, cobalt, silver, nickel or brass. Silver, nickel or brass. Living in a high society, living on station, part of the alliance, the United Federation, picking up the pieces from the Cardi occupation. You could be a Klingon with a genetic mutation, a symbiont Andorian, a tortured Irish curly-haired Caucasian, waiting on the holosuite, playing a game of space dolls. Really matters not, everyone is welcome in Quarks. Yes, everyone is welcome in Quarks. Everyone is welcome in Quarks. Gold pressed platinum,